Hello everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Robert Winfrey, and I'd like to thank everyone for listening, be that live or after the fact. Fair warning, at the moment, it looks like it's just going to be me. I have not heard yet from Jeff. If he calls me while I'm recording this, he'll be on and we'll just proceed from there. Absent that, just fair warning, it's just me. So, be a little bit shorter of a show, and you will lack the positivity that Jeff brings. Instead, you are mired in the sad miasma that is my existence. Alright. Without getting too much into the depressing stuff just yet, because it's really, this card, it overperformed relative to my expectations. It had some ups and downs, but there were some pretty good moments, so we'll get into all of that. Again, our primary focus for this particular episode will be reviewing UFC Fight Night 135, which ended a 3-week break for the UFC, and precedes another 1-week break before UFC 228, which will be in 2 weeks. So, we'll be going over all of that. There was some news. There wasn't a whole lot of major news from what I can remember, but there is, there's always some. They fleshed out a couple of fight cards. They announced a few things, so I'll go over what I have from that down in my notes. But again, if Jeff calls in, I'll be happy to bring him on and introduce him when he does. Until then, it's just me, so let's go ahead and jump into this. So last night, UFC Fight Night 135 was the UFC's debut in the state capital of Lincoln, Nebraska. They have twice been to Omaha. And that state 3 times. My state, one mediocre event. Headlined by Yair Rodriguez and frickin' Alex Caceres. I don't know. Bigger market there, I assume. Again, I assume. I don't know. Anyway. But for those, I need to make a couple of brief apologies for this card. Not for this card, for stuff I said last week. One, it turned out to be a decent card, all things considered. I was probably still, again, dealing with too much burnout and, stuff associated with that. And I'm a generally negative person to begin with, so. That said, I'm happy to be wrong. Anytime I say I think a card's going to suck and it doesn't, I am happy that I'm wrong. And in this instance, I most certainly was. A couple of other specific corrections I need to make, but I'll get to those when I get to some of those specific fights. Anyway, in your main event, Justin Gaethje defeated James Vick via knockout. God, this was bad. This was a bad knockout, guys. First round, like 90 seconds, a minute 27, I think, into the first. I picked Vick last week. I picked him officially at the round table. The big thing I said even when picking Vick was that he had habits that matched up badly with what Justin Gaethje does. He gets pushed into the fence real easily, and that's where Gaethje does his best work. He leaves his chin wide open and straight up in the air, which is bad generally, much less against someone like Gaethje. And he doesn't dictate distance very well. And all of those seem to combine into one horrifying moment as Gaethje backed him into the fence, kind of pawed a left at him to get him to react to it as he stepped into the pocket. Vick's left hand dropped a little bit, his chin was straight up in the air, and one overhand right from Gaethje sent him to the dark lands. This was bad. He was sleeping with his eyes open. I mean, Vick was not at all aware of what was going on around him for at least a minute. I mean, Gaethje celebrated. He did his backflip off the cage, jumped over the cage to celebrate with family and coaches sitting cage side, jumped back into the cage, went over, jawed with Lloyd Irvin, who is James Vick's coach, then went over to see James Vick, who was finally sitting up on his stool, did kind of that, it's like a Muay Thai half collar tie, the hand on the back of the head thing, just kind of as a forehead to forehead, because there was a lot of bad blood between these two of them. James Vick talked a lot in the build-up to this fight. So Gaethje went over to kind of, be not a complete douche about it. And Vick, still in slow motion, and still after all that time not knowing where he was, kind of attempted this really half-hearted double leg onto Gaethje. This was a bad knockout. I mean, he was out for a long time. Thankfully, he did seem to recover a bit. He was mostly himself by the time he left the cage. He's, talked a little bit since then. He's not, to the best of my knowledge, going through any, massive post-concussion syndrome issues, but who knows. This was a much, much needed win for Gaethje, who was just 1-2 in the UFC, and his only win was over Michael Johnson, and we'll get to Johnson in a minute, but it was a great fight, but it wasn't, beating Michael Johnson is not exactly a big benchmark, all things considered. He loses to Alvarez and Poirier, and there's only so much, and it's never good to lose, never good to lose two in a row, but if you have to, former champion Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier is in the title picture. Not the worst losses if you have to take him. And he needed a win here to kind of bounce back from that loss. Good for him. As for Vic, this is the second time Vic's taken a step up in competition and has lost badly because of it. If you look over the rest of his UFC record, he debuted in the UFC at 4-0, went on a 5-fight winning streak. It's hard to say what the best win of that run is. It's either Ramsey Nijem, not a good win, or Jake Matthews, which actually was a pretty good win. Then he takes a step up in competition, and Beneil Dariush knocks him stupid in a little over 4 minutes. He goes on a 4-fight winning streak. 3 of them finishes. Gets another step up, in this case to Gaethje, and gets knocked out in the first round. I don't want to, pull the plug on his career or anything, but I think we might have seen his ceiling at this point. And what's probably most troubling about this from the perspective of, someone watching him, he's had these issues forever. He's not good about his defense. He's not good about moving his head. And there's 2 different ways you can actually get him way out of position. One is what Dariush did to him, actually, which was kind of backing up and getting him to overcommit coming forward and then countering him. I mean, even when he beat Glyco Franca, he got countered pretty significantly through that entire first round. When he fought Joseph Duffy, he won in the second, but he lost, if memory serves, that whole first round. He's had these same issues for, at this point, literal years, and if he's not been able to reliably address them, I'm not saying he can't, but I don't think it bodes well that he hasn't to this point. Which isn't to say he didn't have moments in this fight. He had some decent enough moments. He was landing a pretty decent left body kick. And the times when he was diligent about his positioning in the cage, when he was diligent about his range, he was doing all right. He was avoiding most of Gaethje's leg kicks. He was trying to keep things long, and he was successful in that particular endeavor. But he's not consistent enough with his application, and it gets him caught. And against Gaethje, it cost him his consciousness. As for what's next for Gaethje, I don't know. Somebody on Twitter said this. Forgive me for not remembering who. I want to say it was that guy who I don't know if he still works for Ariel Helwani or not, but I think he goes by the New York Rick moniker. Mentioned that Justin Gaethje delivers this bonkers knockout in the first round, celebrates, in the post-fight interview says he's glad he knocked the guy out, which he did. Then, when Paul Felder asked him who he wanted next, he said, "Sure, I'll fight Tony Ferguson." Nobody calls out Tony Ferguson. Now, plenty of people have fought Tony and are willing to fight Tony, but this is just the second time I can think of off the top of my head that when asked, who do you want to fight next, somebody said, yeah, Tony Ferguson. I mean, nobody wants that fight. Tony's a madman, and he will cut you to pieces. For the record, the only other one I can think of was Islam Makhachev, who after his most recent win said he was willing to fight Tony. Tony's just one of those guys who doesn't get called out, and it stands out when he does. And then as Felder was trying to walk away, who's, for those of you, I assume you all know this, but Paul Felder's also a lightweight competitor in the UFC. Gaethje kind of holds onto his wrist, calls him back over, puts his arm around his shoulders, and goes, I heard you said you wanted to fight me. And Felder, being both a kind of a badass and a professional, with the broadcaster, says, yeah, I said I'd fight you, and I'd love to fight you. And Gaethje just kind of smiles at him and says, I think I'd rather fight Tony, both because Tony's a bigger fight, and I think there was a little bit of just respect that I'd rather fight Tony than fight you type thing, and credit. So it's just a near flawless presentation of who Justin Gaethje is and why certain aspects of the fan base, a large part of the fan base, love that guy. He's probably never going to be champion. I won't say never, but probably never going to be champion. He's probably not going to be around all that much longer because of the way he fights. But I'm hard-pressed to find too many other fighters who have presented themselves in such a way that is, so universally, essentially endearing in a lot of respects. Again, there are critics of Gaethje's style. I'm one of them from time to time. I think he could be doing better than he is, but he's made his choices, and I'm not his father or any person holding any sort of influence over him, and quite frankly, I'm happier with it that way. But this is a guy who's basically built to do what he's doing on the stage that he's doing it. And that's very cool and needs to be acknowledged. As for him, again, calling out Tony Ferguson, I want to see that fight now. I hadn't even thought about it. Just Tony's... At the moment, Tony exists in this weird place where... I know he's one of the 2 or 3 best lightweights in the world. I mean, quite frankly, I favor Tony over everyone else in that division easily. When I say easily, that doesn't mean he can't lose. That means if you were to, if someone comes up to me and goes, so, make a fight pick between, since they announced it, Tony Ferguson and Anthony Pettis. Oh, Tony. What about Tony and, Iaquinta? Tony. Tony and Kevin Lee? Tony. I mean, he's beaten a bunch of these guys already anyway, but... Tony and Gaethje, even, since this is kind of... I favor Tony. Tony and Conor? Tony. The only one I have to actually stop and think about, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this fight because they've tried to make it so many times, is Tony and Khabib. Because that's the only one I'm not quite sure about. Now, again, any of those fights, so if Tony fought Conor and Conor knocked him out, I wouldn't be shocked. But I would favor Tony going into that fight. Between his pressure, his style, his general level of insanity, his cardio, there's things about him that match up very badly for Conor. Now again, does that mean Conor is incapable of winning the fight? Not at all. Who do I favor? Tony. And I favor him over basically the entire division. But does that mean he can't lose? Not at all. Again, he can lose some of those fights. He could lose a fight. Again, if he were to fight, he could lose to Pettis. I would be surprised if he lost to Pettis. Just because of how they match up. But he could. Pettis is dangerous. And Tony's got a significant layoff that he's coming off of and is a bit of a wild man. So, we'll see how that particular fight plays out. And my point there was, Gaethje and Tony is a fight that I never really considered because, again, I consider Tony in the title orbit, and at the moment that is not where Gaethje is. But now that it's kind of out there, yes, I want that fight. The amount of just blood and guts and insanity that would go into that is everything. is everything. But I don't think my heart could take it. I'd watch that fight and just go into... I'd have some kind of medical problem before it was over. Just my heart would burst. Like, it would be that great. That said, again, let me put it this way, especially if Tony loses. If Tony loses to Anthony Pettis, then I think you book him and Gaethje. If Tony wins, and he wins impressively, he's back kind of in the title picture. Look, Tony and Pettis are... they announced that as the co-main event for UFC 229. UFC 229 is headlined by Khabib and Conor. That co-main event is there specifically to have someone on that same card to step into the title fight if either Conor or Khabib falls out. Someone mentioned that it would be just sweet, sweet poetic justice if Conor gets injured, pulls out, and it's a Conor McGregor injury that leads to us finally getting Tony and Khabib. Which I would love. I would love that, not because I hate Conor, but I care less about Conor versus Khabib than I do about Conor versus Tony. Or not Conor, excuse me, Khabib versus Tony. I've wanted to see that fight since the first time they tried to make it years ago. And sadly, it just has never materialized. And if that's what it takes for it to come through, I don't care. I want to see those two crazy guys beat the crap out of each other. Vic should be back kind of fighting where he was before. Not strictly the rank and file, but let me look up the UFC rankings here to see where I think he should be. He's beaten Francisco Trinaldo. You could do him and Dan Hooker. Hooker's on a pretty good run. No one's quite sure what's up with El Iaquinta. Apparently they're trying to book a rematch between Iaquinta and Kevin Lee, which is, I believe, Kevin Lee's only loss. Michael Chiesa's probably leaving the division. You could do Vic and Alex Hernandez. That's not a bad thought. I don't know specifically, but he's going to be back fighting, that, say, level 13 or so to 20-ish ranked guy, approximately, and he'll have to work his way back up towards someone in the top 10 again. But Vic's, again, for all the things I said about his faults, he's kind of got a decent enough fight IQ and fight stature to beat a lot of the rank-and-file guys, so we'll see where it goes from here. And it was a good finish to the night, big knockout, and it needed that reversal of momentum after the previous two fights, which I will get into here. In your co-main event, Michael Johnson defeated Andre Fili via split decision. There were two 29-28s for Johnson, one 30-27 for Fili. I want to say that 30-27 for Fili came from Sal D'Amato, who continues to be just the dirt worst. You have the subterranean worst, which is someone like Adelaide Bird, or Cecil Peoples, but Sal D'Amato is terrible. He is just terrible. I don't think you can give Fili the first round. Scoring it live, I scored it for Fili. I gave him rounds 2 and 3. Now, again, I don't see how he won round 1. He got hit pretty cleanly more often than he hit Johnson. His offense was largely limited to kicks that didn't go anywhere. It felt like a Johnson round. Round 2 was clearly Fili's. He had Johnson's back for a prolonged period of time. Couldn't do much with it, but he had... Oh, God, I have to talk about this. He very nearly had a rear naked choke locked up in the second round. He had Johnson's back. Johnson was standing, so he was in the backpack position. He finally gets an arm kind of around Johnson's chin. It's not all the way under it, but it's around it. He leans back. He's able to drag this fight back to the actual mat. But if you look at how they land and their head position relative to each other and where Johnson has two arms under Fili's arm and elbow, so he's trying to push it up off of his neck and over his face. And as this is happening, Fili has a gable grip. Now, I'm a big advocate for the gable grip in rear naked chokes, all things considered. But you have to know which grip and which choking structure is appropriate for the situation you find yourself in. And in this one, I believe Fili would have been better served with a figure 4 grip, which is putting your own choking arm, it's on your bicep, kind of by your elbow, against the traditional sleeper hold, if you watch type of arm position. in large part because that lets you control their head more. And if Johnson's trying to push your arm up and off over his face, if you have one arm or your hand on the back of his head kind of forcing it down, that makes that whole endeavor much more difficult. Instead, he just really sold out on the straight Gable grip, which is great if they've been hand fighting already. It's also really great, again, if they're kind of doing the 2-on-1 hand defense, because you can get to that position a lot quicker. Your head position relative to their head position matters, and how they're defending matters. In this instance, had Feely adjusted his grip, he was also a little high, if memory serves. You really want your heads to be about on the same level, and Johnson's was lower. I can't remember how that factors into it. But my point being, I think if he had gone with a figure 4 grip instead of a Gable grip there, he might have been able to get it. But he didn't. And again, he still won the round. And so, I think most reasonable people had this round apiece going into the third. Which leads us to the third round. The fight's a round apiece going into the third, unless you're Sal D'Amato and a moron. And then in the third round, we have no definitive winner. There is no definitive winner of that round. I think if I was less rusty when covering this, I would have just scored that 10-10 and had it been a draw, because I think that's a more accurate representation of what takes place in that round than giving it to either guy. I think I gave it to Feely, but I think I said, who knows or cares? It was a terrible round. Johnson wins a mediocre split decision in a pretty terrible fight, breaks a 3-fight losing streak, gets his first win at featherweight, and who cares? Andre Feely loses his first winning streak, and who cares? These guys are where they are at this point. They've kind of landed where they've landed. I don't especially know what's next for either of them, but they've both got a fair amount of work to do. This was Feely's big moment. He finally had a winning streak, which he... Can I just say that I forget who said it on the pre-fight hype package for this fight. It might have been Daniel Cormier, who said that Andre Feely looked like a world beater when he fought Artem Lobov. Artem Lobov exists to make other people look good. It's not hard to look like a world beater against Artem Lobov. You look like a world beater against someone who doesn't suck. And he edges out this controversial split decision over Bermudez, and not a good fight. At women's strawweight, Courtney Casey defeated Angela Hill via split decision. I didn't care for this fight. It was what we thought it would be. It's two kind of decent strikers doing a lot of, showy... God, if either of these women had power, this would have been over, because their defense was pretty porous. Angela Hill continues to have good first rounds and then just fade horribly. I don't know. Casey wins a split decision. There was one 30-27 for Casey, which I think is dubious, but none of these rounds were definitive either way, so I didn't agree with it. I think I scored it 30-27 for Hill, but for the record, that's how all those rounds were. All of them were just a lot of the same from both women. It was, okay, here's a leg kick here or there, a body kick here or there, a brief flurry, most of it's blocked. Here's a combination, again, most of it's blocked, a bit of it sneaks through. It wasn't... There weren't a whole lot of stretches of nothing, but there was a lot of just kind of stuff. So I have no issue with Casey winning. It was a meh fight. Those two fights kind of derailed some of the momentum of this card from where I was sitting. Strawweight's in a weird spot. It really is. Because Casey's lost to Herrig and Watterson. She's not really in the title picture. She's lost to Gedalia too. Jeez. Again, Strawweight's just in a weird spot right now, all things considered. You have Suarez, who's about to fight not Torres, about to fight Esparza. Grasso was supposed to be in this fight and fell off. Juan Calderwood had a decent enough win. He could maybe... No, Calderwood's at flyweight now, not strawweight, so shouldn't be ranked there. Thank you, UFC website, for being horribly out of date. I don't know. Again, it's in a weird spot. But, and again, this was just kind of a there fight for me. Alright, next up, Jake Ellenberger lost, again, to the shock of no one. Brian Barberena defeated Ellenberger via TKO in the first round. Commentary tried to play up Barberena as having really heavy hands, and I don't think that's accurate. I'm sure being punched in the face by him isn't fun, mind you, but he's not a one-punch knockout kind of guy. He's much more of a accuracy over power type of fighter. And he's going to throw enough at you that one of them's going to land clean, and once he hurts you, he's not going to let you recover. Is more kind of his style as far as that goes. And in this instance, it was just getting Ellenberger to bite on a combination that he had kind of a little, a bit of a 1-2 that wasn't much on. It didn't really land cleanly, but Ellenberger thought it was only a 1-2, and then he threw a right hook over Ellenberger's shoulder that just caught him square on the jaw, and Ellenberger's chin has been shot for a couple of years now. Barberena then doesn't let him recover. He just pounds him out on the ground, gets the win. Good for him. I'm struggling to get a real feel for Barberena, because if you look at his losses at welterweight, he's only lost to Colby Covington and Leon Edwards. And, Covington is technically still the interim champion for the moment, and Edwards just schooled Donald Cerrone pretty solidly in order to extend his winning streak to, 6? 6 in a row. So he's only lost to the really good guys, but I haven't really seen him fight and beat anyone all that good either. His best win in terms of quality is probably Warlley Alves, but Alves is, I don't know. I don't consider him a huge name win, in competition-wise. And again, Jake Ellenberger, 6 years ago was a good win. In 2018, not so much. So I don't know who I'd like to see him fight next. You could do him and Krause, because James Krause won on the prelims here. Brian Barberena and James Krause could work. Jake Ellenberger retired. He's from Nebraska. He's from Omaha, I seem to recall. He again got finished decisively, but he was in his home state, very near his hometown. Actually, I'm not sure of the geography of Nebraska. I shouldn't say very near if I'm not certain of that. So, but he got to retire there. This was long overdue. Again, like at least 2 years. This guy should have retired. But he finally arrived at the correct conclusion of retirement. If he just really wanted to go out in his home state, all right. It's his health, it's not mine. So good for him. And I've been down on Ellenberger for a while, just because again, he's like 2-9 in his last 11 fights. He's on a 4-fight losing streak. He's only won. He's on a horrible streak. That said, there was a period of time when he was a top welterweight in 2011, sort of 2012-ish. He was a monster, and I maintain that I think some of that was due to various substances he was taking, but at the same time, I imagine so was essentially everyone else, so there's only so much shade I can throw at that. He went on this streak where he beat... he was the first guy to finish Jake Shields with strikes, I think. I'm going to double check that. First in a long time. Jake Shields lost his third ever professional fight due to TKO. Then, yeah, it wasn't until every other loss he had was a decision. Up until that Ellenberger fight. Jeez, he's still only been stopped with strikes 3 times. He got tapped by Paul Harris. He lost a decision to Fitch. This is all post-UFC. And then Ray Cooper III steamrolled him pretty hard. But, yeah, that's still stopping Jake Shields with strikes is nothing to sneeze at. And he was the first guy in a really long time to do it. Yeah, again, he should have retired earlier, but there was a period of time when he was near the top, certainly a top 10 guy, arguably top 5. All right, next up, this fight. This is one that I undersold a bit last week, and I do want to apologize for that. Deiveson Figueiredo defeats John Moraga via TKO in the second round. These two, both of them, just went after it. I don't know if I was just confusing Figueiredo with someone else when we previewed this last week. I still would have picked Moraga, mind you. I'm not trying to backtrack on this and say, well, if I had I could have picked better. I still think I would have favored Moraga, but for some reason I forgot that there was some disconnect with me about who specifically Figueiredo was. Because, this guy's nickname is Deus de Guerra, and in Portuguese that means God of War, and he lives up to that. He's now 4-0 in the UFC. 3 of those are stoppages. On offense, he's a brutal guy. He's elbows and body shots and pace and pressure and just wants to hurt you. He's got good takedowns from the clinch. He's got serious ground and pound. He works best at a half guard, I think. But he just put a pretty significant beating on John Moraga, and Moraga, even when he loses, he doesn't usually get just kind of beat up like this. He had the doctor stoppage in the Dodson loss. I think it was swelling or a cut in one of his eyes. There was something there that just, they weren't comfortable with it. He lost to Benavidez decisively, lost to Nicolau, lost to Pettis, but none of those were just kind of like, I'm going to beat you up like you owe me money. And that's exactly what Figueiredo did to him. Just beat the crap out of him. Hurt him badly to the body, dropped him with body shots a couple of times, including the last one. I would like to think that Figueiredo's earned a pretty significant shot for his next fight. I would like to see, I think I mentioned this, I would like to see him fight Joseph Benavidez, actually. You've also got, Alexandre Pantoja, Jussier Formiga, Ray Borg's an option. There's guys for him to fight. And I think I joked with Jeff about it. Jeff said that, this should get him a big opportunity. I said, so he's probably going to main event the Facebook portions of the preliminary card against, Dustin Ortiz. Because that's just how the UFC has historically booked the flyweight division. I like the Benavidez fight. It's a big step up for him, but Benavidez is coming off of that, his first ever 3-round, not ever, but his first 3-round fight loss in the UFC, his first non-title fight loss in the UFC, and that big layoff. I don't know, I kind of like that fight. It might be too much. If you wanted to go with him, if you wanted to keep trying to bring him along, Wilson Hayes would be an option. Again, I kind of joked about Dustin Ortiz or Ray Borg, but that would also be an option for those guys. So, it's time for him to take another step is all. And he's a fun guy to watch, especially at flyweight. Again, I don't necessarily think that entire division isn't that long for the UFC, but while it's there, we should enjoy it. And kicking everything off, Eric Anders. This finish, man. Knocks out Tim Williams with a head kick in the third round. The fight itself was just kind of there. This was not an especially inspired performance from either guy. Tim Williams had a lot more success in the first round than I thought he would. Anders kind of got going in the second and third. Eric Anders has... You can tell there's athleticism to the guy. Even if you didn't know his background, just watching him fight, you can tell he's an athlete. But his punching offense is very left-hand... And he's a southpaw, for those of you who don't know. When I say left-hand heavy, I'm not talking about his punching power, which is non-trivial. But the majority of his offense comes from his left hand. Connor's kind of the same way, actually. If you look at Connor, one of the big criticisms of him in his striking is how uninspired his lead hand is. It doesn't really do anything. It's kind of either pause or it kind of loops. It's just kind of there. And Anders has kind of the same problem, but for different reasons. He just doesn't do much with it. He doesn't jab. He doesn't hook. He's not big on combinations yet. These are things he can fix. But the majority of his offense comes from his left, and when you're that predictable, it can be a problem. And that's one of the things Williams had a lot of success with in the first round, was constantly moving to, and this is Williams' perspective, so moving to his own left, away from that power hand. He was able to turn an angle and land some pretty good counter shots and kind of fluster Anders. Then in the third, the finish I have to talk about very briefly. Anders kind of off. He knocked Williams down in the second round with a left. He knocked him down again in the third with a straight left. Then towards the end of the round, he lands a bit of this high kick. There's not a whole lot on it, but they're both in this awkward position, so he kind of pushes Williams over. And Williams is on his back, trying to kind of invite Anders down. And Anders doesn't... This is a really cool thing that he did. The referee does not step in to stand up Tim Williams. So if Tim Williams is getting up, he's at risk. But Anders does back off just enough to give Williams space to think he's letting him back up. Then as he's getting up, he's doing a very technical get-up from a jiu-jitsu perspective. So he's got one hand up, kind of not touching Anders, but out there to kind of block. One hand on the mat, pushing himself up. And as he's getting up, Eric Anders kicks him in the head and knocks him out cold. That jiu-jitsu get-up is great for jiu-jitsu. It's good for MMA too. You want to do these things technically correct. But I think you better be very aware when doing this type of, this type of get-up, which rule set you're under if you're competing in MMA. Under the old rules, anything other than the soles of your feet on the ground means you're a downed opponent. You cannot be kicked or kneed in the head. Under the new rules, you need, again, if you're on your seat or you have a knee down, you're downed. That's not ever been in discussion for changing, nor should it, for my money. But you need both palms or both fists flat on the mat to be considered downed. Again, if you do not have a knee or hip down. And as Anders was getting up, he only has one hand on the ground. As soon as his knee, and because of how you're getting up, your knee is the last thing. As soon as his knee is off the ground, even though that much of his weight is on one hand, the other hand's in the air. You are legal to be kicked in the head. And in all fairness to Anders on this, Williams' hand had cut. His bracing hand, his posting hand, was off the ground when that kick landed. So even under the old rules, it would have been legal. It just would have been a lot closer to being illegal. In this instance, and actually, again, the relevant thing for this under the new rules was where his knee was. And his knee was far enough off the ground that it was good. But I think commentary was a little confused about this because Paul Felder mentioned, I have to see where his hand is. And when really the hand is not at issue here unless it's both hands because new rules, but because we are operating under different rule sets, it can be confusing for all parties concerned. Just to anyone utilizing that particular get-up in the future, know which rule set you're under. If you're under the new rules, you need both hands down. If you only have one and you're not on a knee, you can get kicked. And Anders, this was a beautiful finish. A mediocre fight, but a really nice finish. I don't know what you do with Anders. I'm not sure specifically. Again, he's coming off of that loss to Lyoto Machida. I thought he won, but such is life. He's just, I don't know, he's in kind of a weird, he's in a decent spot. Because he only has that one loss. But I'm not sure what you do with him next. I can't remember if he called anyone out. Probably not. I'm not entirely sure I'd like to see him fight. He shouldn't be fighting anyone in the top 10 yet. I'm not sold on him fighting anyone even in the top 15. Oh no, we called out Elias Theodorou. That's it. Yeah, Theodorou or Krzysztof Jotko. I'd be down for those fights. Those are 14 and 15 respectively in the rankings. That makes sense for him, all things considered. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that he called out Theodorou. I'm like, no, that makes sense. Real credit to Anders on these call-outs. He's not shooting for the moon. He's shooting for a fight that makes sense for him and is of the highest profile that he believes is appropriate. Again, he called out Machida when Machida was, aging and fading, and I, again, thought he won. Here he calls out Theodorou, who's a top 15 guy, but is an appropriate step up in his career from where he is right now. So credit to him for that. On the prelims, James Krause defeated Warley Alves via TKO in the second round. Caught Alves coming in with a really nice knee. I'm not completely sold on Krause at welterweight. There's a lot that he gains by not having to worry about his weight cut. He's much quicker, but he's not a very athletic striker or fighter. He gets by on accuracy, which is great, on, kind of savvy as a veteran. But he has won 5 in a row now. And Warley Alves isn't the best name in the world you could beat, but it's a win that he needed. And I'm not sure who he should be fighting next. I mean, again, I kind of like him in Barberina because I think that would be an interesting test for both guys, but I'm not completely sure. Again, Krause he's got a winning UFC record, and he's a good fighter, but if you look at his losses, specifically, like Bobby Green and Jorge Masvidal, it's when he took a step up from the, say, bottom third of the roster towards the middle third, or the middle half is another way to kind of think of that. And on his current winning streak, and I'm not trying to say that these wins don't mean anything, but he's beat Darren Cruikshank, who's not in the UFC anymore, Shane Campbell, who's not in the UFC anymore, Tom Galicchio, who I'm barely aware of as existing, Alex White. And I mean, that White win might be his best, and White's 2-4, and White's record is 3-4 in the UFC. He's not fighting again certainly not the cream of the crop, but not even in some respects, middle third is kind of where he's sort of operating. He's keeping guys from progressing into that middle third. But anytime he fights someone within that sphere or kind of above him, he seems to struggle a bit. But a lot of that was also at lightweight. We'll see how welterweight pans out for him. I also don't necessarily hate the thought of him and Sage Northcutt. Because he'd be in some respects, he'd be a test for Northcutt, and Northcutt would be a challenge in terms of athleticism and speed for Krause that I think he needs to really address if he's going to continue at welterweight. I don't know. At bantamweight, another guy I owe an apology to. Corey Sandhagen defeated Yuri Alcantara. I don't know who I was confusing Corey Sandhagen for last week when we previewed this, but the only Sandhagen fight that I saw that I can remember seeing is his UFC debut, and he fought, I believe it was Austin Arnett. And Austin Arnett is not good. And I remember saying at the time that I thought that fight sucked, and somewhere I was confusing the Sandhagen versus Arnett fight with the Arnett versus Dawodu fight, which did suck. And there might have also been just kind of a general, a couple of other guys from Dana White's Contender Series that have fought in the UFC. There's somebody with this god-awful Superman logo tattooed on his chest, and there's the Mississippi guy with the beard. I can't remember their names for the life of me, and quite frankly, I don't care to. But prior to this fight, I actually looked up the Sandhagen-Arnett fight, and Corey Sandhagen was not who I thought he was. I thought he looked pretty good when he beat Arnett because he just thoroughly dismantled him and finished him. Now, that isn't to say that I would have picked any different. I still believe I would have picked Yuri Alcantara for this fight. But I just wanted to apologize to Sandhagen in the sense that I did him a disservice in what I said about his abilities last week, and just need to apologize for that. This fight was nuts. In the first 30 seconds, almost immediately, Corey Sandhagen and Alcantara wind up scrambling on the ground a little bit. I can't remember if Sandhagen tripped or Alcantara hit kind of a throw, something like that. And Alcantara locks up this armbar that, oh my word, this was tight. Sandhagen's elbow was bent the opposite direction. Your elbow does not bend that way. This wasn't a textbook standard armbar from Alcantara. He didn't have his right leg in this instance over Sandhagen's head. He had it behind, so it's more of a triangle armbar in that respect. But he also was applying it correctly in that one of the reasons that armbar from that position is easier to defend and escape from has to do with how it's applied. If you have just a hold of their wrist or forearm the same way you do in a traditional armbar, it's harder to get to completely get the correct leverage to really pop it. And again, still not pleasant, and plenty of people have tapped to it, and I'm not trying to throw huge dispersions on anyone who has in this instance, but I believe we have Jeff coming in. Hello, Jeff.
All right, I'm here now. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. I was just about to talk about, I think it was Sandhagen and Alcantara, because, boy, that fight. But I'm happy to backtrack and give you some time to talk about the main card if you'd like.
I actually do want to talk about that fight personally, because, I'm an Alcantara fan. And I guess, what do you say about, Alcantara? Is it, Sandhagen, the way he survived that armbar was insane, but I feel like, did Alcantara not have him there dead to rights or not? I feel like he should have been able to, if not finish his submission, end that fight with that kind of position, and he just didn't take it at all.
Well, there's two things about that. One of them is there's only so much damage you can do to somebody's elbow before, he had that locked in. He had it again. I was talking a little bit about how he was applying the armbar because it wasn't a traditional straight armbar.
Right.
He had, his own arm. He had the wrist trapped.
He even had his head he had his head scissored and triangled at one point.
Yeah, he had it triangled. He had his own.
He had
was
he
under
had
the elbow
room to land strikes from that position as well.
Yeah, he had that elbow bent completely backwards, landed some hammer fists. I mean, here's the thing about this, and
And I'll credit Sandhagen because he didn't even scream or anything, or he
I
didn't
mean,
like
uh,
because a scream can be like a yell can be
it's a verbal submission.
right. That can
Uh,
be a verbal, and he didn't. He didn't tap or submit. So credit to that. But I still feel like Alcantara, a veteran like him, should have been able to stop that fight.
uh, there's something. The other thing I wanted to touch on about this fight and kind of get to going forward. The referee could have stopped that fight as soon as Alcantara landed a few of those hammer fists, and I don't think anyone would have really complained.
I mean,
Sandhagen would have, his corner might have, but you have your elbow bent at a significant angle the opposite
the ref
direction.
was a little lenient, and I will admit the ref was a little lenient with that fight.
Oh, on both sides, it was that fight should have been stopped earlier.
Right,
it
you
was
know
a terrible
what?
Job.
Even when it was stopped for Sandhagen, the referee was very late. I feel like, but I don't know. Like, does that say something about Alcantara that he couldn't finish that fight when he had such a great position like that?
I don't know. I tend to think of that as more being a credit to Sandhagen's toughness because, what else are you going to do after you've completely, it looks like you've dislocated that guy's elbow?
It almost reminds me of Benson Henderson, because wouldn't we see just like his body just bent in crazy angles?
Yeah.
He would just work through it.
Yeah. And
people, we forgot because it was years ago. But I just remember in the WEC and even his early UFC career, like Benson Henderson, it was like he was made of rubber,
Oh yeah, he was in. I forget who had him. Somebody had him in a fully locked-in knee bar, and he was just chilling.
Yeah.
He was almost impossible to choke for a long time. Because
and then that's
Cerrone
why
had him in a couple of chokes.
I was in disbelief about that Pettis submission, because I was like, there was no way. I really truly believe there was no way anyone could ever submit Benson Henderson, because I had seen him put in like the nastiest submission holds imaginable, and it was like it didn't affect him at all. Like I thought he had like some crazy powers or something.
Yeah, in this instance, I think it's more credit to Sandhagen than it is because Alcantara did everything right you're supposed to do in that situation. He even switched sides with the armbar after he just didn't like the angle he had when it was on his right, so he switched it to his left. Still had it locked in. Still had the arm in proper position, so that all the pressure's on the elbow joint. It's one of those things where sometimes an armbar in particular, if you don't have the wrist held in the appropriate position, it can look worse than it is. And in the case of Alcantara here, no, he had everything locked in about as good as it can get. That was... I just have no idea how Sandhagen didn't tap. I genuinely have no idea, because...
He said his elbow or something popped.
It most certainly did.
I feel like if that happened to me, I would be crying.
Oh, I would have been
couldn't get me out of there.
I would have been done quick enough. Fast. As soon as he sits back that first time for that armbar, I'm tapping. Nope, I like the ability to use my arm. And Sandhagen survives that, rolls through, spends the next 3.5 minutes, probably more than that actually, closer to 4 minutes.
The thing is, if someone holds on for a submission too long, that's almost better for the person on the receiving end of it, because the person who's holding on is burning out their energy trying to finish that submission hold. And that's a prime opportunity for you to turn the fight around and shift the momentum. We've seen guys go for chokes and just overcommit, and they can't finish the choke, and then the person on the bottom, or the person who almost gets choked out, can recover. That's a good way for them to recover and take over the fight.
Yeah, some of that depends on the specific submission as well. Again,
Yep.
I don't know. Part of me just doesn't know what else Alcantara could have done in this situation. I understand your point. how did you not finish that guy there? And at the same
Yeah.
time, I looked at that and I went, I genuinely don't know what else you could have done to finish him from that position. You destroyed his arm, basically. You slammed him in the face with hammer fist. You cut him open, and the guy just wasn't going away. And then he didn't adjust well. I think he was way too complacent about trying to recapture guard once Sandhagen kind of got on top and started punching him.
He was very complacent after losing that armbar, I think.
Yeah, he should. I felt. I mean, that was.
I think that's why I was
moment.
disappointed.
Like,
he did look very complacent after that submission attempt.
And after that, Sandhagen just works him over. The fight should have been like. I mean, the referee. They did not bring him back the rest of the evening because he did such a bad job here.
It's not. That was not good officiating. Back to the main event. Would you say that was better improvement on Gaethje's part? Did he show more patience?
Yeah.
Not not go out guns blazing like right at the bell.
Yeah, he was definitely more patient. He also, I mean, he did some feinting, which is something he almost never does. He showed a bit of a jab.
Vic looked a little. He looked a little overwhelmed to me. He looked slow and he looked sluggish as well.
I think a lot of it was just his bad habits all kind of caught up to him at once. He didn't manage the distance well. He didn't manage his position in the cage well.
I think he did score some good body kicks.
Yeah. I mean, he had moments. He landed some good body kicks. There were times when he was dictating distance. He was avoiding a lot of what Gaethje was doing. But he couldn't sustain that for anything approaching a real length of time. And then when Gaethje just kind of backed him into the fence, severely limiting his movement, he swung at him, and Vic's left hand came down and his chin stayed up. And then...
I don't know. I thought Vic would have been more prepared for a battle.
I don't know. We might.
I guess I overestimated. I don't know, but he didn't. He didn't look well all week to me.
Did you see him at that weigh-in? Man, he looked bad.
Terrible.
I mean, he's always looked bad at weigh-ins because he's such a big guy. I mean, he's 6'3".
We can't overlook these weight cuts. It happened with it happened with Miesha Tate as well. But it's a good win for Justin Gaethje, and Gaethje's a very fan-friendly fighter. But I mean, it's not going to mean a whole lot if you're constantly losing the big fights. So it was important for him to get this win, and that'll at least keep him around in the main event scene for a while. I think he called out Tony Ferguson after.
He did.
But Ferguson, as far as I know, is set to fight Pettis. And I mean, as a Ferguson fan, I love that fight just because that fight, I think, heavily favors Ferguson. And
the entire division favors Ferguson, basically. I talked a little bit about this before you came on, but I genuinely favor Tony over the entire division, basically.
I favor Tony over Khabib, and I still stand by that. But
that's the only one I actually have pause and have to think about if you ask me who I favor. But I mean, Tony and Conor, I favor Tony.
I mean, with the rate guys get injured, that fight's. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that fight. But let's see.
Well, Ferguson and Pettis is on 229 specifically in case either Conor or Khabib falls out.
Right. So let's see here. Who's Kevin Lee fighting? He has a fight.
They are working on Kevin Lee on the rematch between Kevin Lee and Ali Aquinta.
See, I wouldn't mind. Honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing Gaethje fight Kevin Lee.
No,
that's a very good fight, is it not?
I don't care who Gaethje fights at the.
I think Edson Barboza would be a fun fight.
Oh God,
I don't know if you.
I said, I think that's one of the fights I wanted when he announced his signing, just because, neither of those guys is walking for a week after that fight.
Well, I mean, I think that might be even a good style matchup for Barboza, honestly. Depending on how it goes.
Depends.
See, Kies is still in. You see,
Kies is
Kies is in the 12, even though he's apparently planning to move up. How is Dan Hooker looking right now?
He's looked great.
I mean, Hooker's kind of surging, isn't he?
Yeah, he's
had a few.
He's what, 3-0 at lightweight, and he's finished all of them.
Oh, 3-0 at lightweight, right?
And finished all of them.
He might be a little too low. Yeah, it's just that everyone's got booked or about to get booked right now. So maybe you want to. You don't have. The thing is, you don't have to book Gaethje right away. Honestly,
no. I mean, and
let's wait. We could wait and see how this division. The problem is that this is such a shark-infested division, and the top guys aren't fighting enough. That's the really frustrating thing to me. And guys keep getting hurt.
Yeah, we'll know better after 229, where a lot of other things have kind of shaken out.
Okay. The co-main event was garbage. I don't even want to talk about that.
Yes, it was.
Andre Fili is a disappointment. Michael Johnson isn't a lot better. Who do you think won the women's strawweight? Who did you score it for?
I think live I scored it for Hill, but I thought the fight sucked and didn't care.
Yeah, Jake Ellenberger finally retired. He did what he should have done
3 years
25,
ago.
25. I love Matt Brown, but I kind of blame Matt Brown for this because that gave him confidence to keep going.
If Brown had just defended his body for that second body kick.
Because that drew this. I mean,
Matt Brown's master plan for violence as it pertained to Jake Ellenberger was not beating him, but letting him stick around for 4 more fights to get knocked out in.
What's the point of ending your career on an 0-4 run? It doesn't.
I think he just wanted to do it in his home state.
You want to get the crap beaten out of you in your home state. I mean,
he's fought in Nebraska for, I don't know. People have different emotional attachments to different things. If he wanted to go out,
does he feel better? Does he feel better going out? I mean,
maybe. I don't know. Maybe he does.
Well, maybe he'll try and fight on the regional scene again. We see how rarely retirements stick. And guys, Chris Lytle just came back. And Chris Lytle, if you recall, ended his MMA career on a pretty strong note and he was doing well.
Yeah, he came back at the bare knuckle boxing event and he put a pretty significant beating on his opponent.
I don't like the whole bare knuckle thing, but whatever. Davison Figueiredo looked really good last night. We got to keep an eye on him.
Fear the God of War, baby.
To me, this is more proof that there was nothing boring about that fight, Robert. That was a great fight.
Not a darn moment of that was boring.
That fight was exciting. Even Moraga, I thought, looked pretty good. But Figueiredo, man, I feel like the division could really be opened up more with guys like this, just because Figueiredo, he's a young, exciting prospect. I think we can say that now. And he's been looking really strong in the UFC. This was a huge win. I mean, Moraga.
This was the worst loss of Moraga's career. If you look at, he got
compared to losing to Demetrius Johnson and just not having anything for Johnson. But
he even had. I think he landed on Johnson at one point, but he just got outclassed by a superior fighter in that instance.
Right.
He got beat down in this fight.
Moraga was having one of his better runs. Moraga was having one of his better runs going into the. He beat Wilson Hayes, Magomed Bibulatov, and Ashkan Mokhtarian. Wilson Hayes was a good.
Honestly, I think the most impressive win of that streak was the Bibulatov one because he was a significant underdog and he derailed the hype train around.
So it's not like he beat a ham and egger here. He beat one of the better flyweights, I think. So
Moraga was.
Yeah, I would give him a fight with Benavidez or Brandon Moreno, Sergio, somebody. I would say book him in a title eliminator with Sergio. What's the worst that could happen?
Oh, don't ask me that. Because I'll
The
tell
problem
you.
is that we had Henry Cejudo doesn't want to defend the belt, blah blah blah. But let's see. Figueiredo is number 14 now. Moraga's number 6.
In fairness, I think that was I don't think that was an accurate reflection. I'm not trying to say Moraga wasn't.
I mean, it is flyweight, but I mean this should solidly put him in the top 10. Solidly.
Yeah, I mean, you can put Figueiredo in there next against Dustin Ortiz, Ray Borg, Joseph Benavidez. I'm happy with any of that.
But it's nice to have someone like this around at flyweight who's fast, exciting, finishes guys. He's not like a young man, but I mean, still, he's an exciting prospect, and I'm happy to see that. Eric Anders had a good finish against. I mean, the fight was not a great fight until the finish, but it was an impressive head kick. James Krause looked really good last night too, for that matter. It was one of the better performances of his UFC career. This is like the best run he's ever had.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is his best run so far.
And I think there's something to be said, Robert, for fighting at a more natural weight instead of killing yourself. Because I'm not saying
you should fight where you're most comfortable. For some guys, that's after a weight cut. For some guys, it's after a smaller weight cut.
I'm not saying James Vick should definitely move up, but do you think Vic would have a terrible time of it fighting at welterweight with his athletic gifts?
I think he'd be about where he is. He'd be a little bit lower at welterweight than where he is at lightweight, and at lightweight he's good enough to beat the rank and file. I don't think he's ever really going to crack the top 10. At welterweight, there's a lot of guys he'd beat, but I don't think he'd really reliably crack the top 15.
But I mean, look at how Krause just wore out Alves's gas tank last night.
Alves has never had a good gas tank.
Maybe
that's always been the big knock on him is he sprints a lot, and if you can kind of weather that storm, that's where you beat him.
He did I was really impressed with Krause last night, and I'm very excited to see more of him in welterweight. And I hope I think I'm not saying he should maybe get a top 10 opponent, but he should get a higher level opponent for his next fight. Yeah, maybe a Dong Young Kim. I don't know what Dong Young Kim's doing now.
I think Krause and Barberena, just because I don't think either of them has proven.
I don't love that fight, honestly.
I don't think either of them has proven themselves at a top 15 level, and I think they each need one more win before you can reliably kind of put them.
What
in
about
that
Alex
sphere.
Oliveira?
Cowboy could do that. If Krause wants an easy win, he can fight Sage Northcutt. Easy might be a slight exaggeration of that fight.
Ponzinibbio's been hurt, hasn't he?
There's something. Yeah, he got hurt.
He's gonna fight Neil Magny. Okay. He was supposed to face Usman.
Yeah, in the main event of their Chile
card. Then he
got
injured. Okay. I mean...
Said we got that terrible...
That's the other thing. Ponzinibbio is, really good, but he's been hurt most of the year.
I don't know what Gunnar Nelson's up to. But given his layoff, I think you could do Krause and Nelson.
No, it seems like there's always something with Gunnar Nelson, you know?
There's always something with everybody. You got to book what you can.
But Gunnar Nelson and another guy who just has so much potential and had times where he's just looked like a cold-blooded killer. Those were just kind of my main highlight. Mickey Gall looked really good. Then again, he was that was a gimme fight for him, I think. That was a get-well fight.
I mean, Mickey Gall is now 1-1 in legitimate fights in the UFC.
Right. I mean,
I don't know what to make of him.
What do you think is the ceiling for a guy like Mickey Gall? Do you think he can be a...
I mean, he got out-wrestled and comprehensively outworked by Randy Brown. And Randy Brown is not a world beater.
My problem with Gall is that he entered the UFC at 1-0. And then he fought Mike Jackson, who's not a real fighter.
I mean,
CM Punk not a real fighter.
Northcutt was a gimmick fight. I mean, I won't say.
Northcutt. But I mean,
hang on. I'm not saying
Northcutt's 11-2.
And
he has
Northcutt is
UFC
a legitimate fighter, but that's a gimmick fight.
Okay.
And so if you look at him, if you strip away again the gimmick fights or the randomness of CM Punk, he's 1-1.
1-1. Okay. Do you want to keep going slow with Mickey Gall? Like, keep it going slow with him?
I don't know. I mean, he annoyed me when he called his post-fight call-out was just the dumbest thing in the world.
Like, why would you call out Sage Northcutt, a guy you already beat and finished? I mean,
because he wants another easy win.
I mean,
and then he called for an even easier win.
Against who is it?
He said, "I want to fight the legend Diego Sanchez in Madison Square Garden." I'm like, get out. Just
Diego already retired, or
I don't know. Who knows what
Diego's
doing? Diego doesn't even know what Diego's doing.
The UFC might book that fight. Honestly,
sure.
That might happen. It might happen, Robert.
It might. It's a stupid fight.
I don't
it's an
want
easy
it.
win for Gall, but they might do it.
Oh, and my girl JoJo picked up another win. Good for her.
Yeah, let me run through the last of these again.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sandhagen, again, I apologize to him because I confused him with someone else last week when we previewed this.
Yeah.
I was too down on his skills when I confused him for somebody else. I still would have picked Yuri, but I would not have been as, oh god, Sandhagen sucks, because he doesn't. And I knew that once I rewatched his actual fight, like, oh no, this guy, he's actually pretty good. So I don't know what you do immediately with Sandhagen, but there's a lot of potential there. Andrew Sanchez and Marcus Perez sucked, as do all Andrew Sanchez fights. Mickey Gall, we talked about beating George Sullivan. The only interesting thing here in that fight was Mickey's grip adjustment. Started with the figure 4 grip, switched to the Gable grip as Sullivan was trying to hand fight, which is how you're supposed to do it. I don't know what Gall wants out of his career. If he actually wants to be the best and be taken seriously, a fight with Diego Sanchez is a terrible idea. If he wants to have gimmicky fights that are easy paychecks, Diego Sanchez is a great idea. Joanne Calderwood beat Kalindra Faria. Apparently that's how she wants it pronounced. Calderwood basically got beat up for 4.5 minutes. Finally got wrist control from guard. Got a bit of a triangle choke. Couldn't finish it. Switched to an armbar. Faria defended improperly. Had to tap. I don't know why they don't have Calderwood just fight southpaw at this point. I mean, she fights orthodox, but she fights so sideways that it's easy to get in on her with a clinch or a double leg. And she kicks better with her left leg anyway. I don't know. Women's flyweight is weird. No one quite knows what's going on. Drew Dober defeated John Tuck via unanimous decision, 30-27 and then 30-26 twice. I don't know about Dober, man. I don't know. I mean, in any other division, he's probably a top 20-ish guy. Top 30, certainly. In lightweight, he's run-of-the-mill. I mean, it was a good enough win. Again, he pitched a shutout, but I don't know. I've never been wowed by him. And then kicking everything off, Ronnie Yaya, baby. Submits Luke Sanders with a heel hook, 1 minute and 31 seconds into round 1. Yaya apparently, for the first time in his career, really started getting into leg entanglements and heel hooks in the lead up for this fight. I loved the heel hook he hit here. He was able to get get Sanders down after a bit. Dropped for the leg when Sanders was trying to escape. Couldn't get it. Switched to the other leg. I liked the heel hook because if you look at how he finishes it, he doesn't actually have the best control over the knee line, and he doesn't have his legs in the best position to control Sanders. But he forces Sanders to roll into the fence and remove his ability to continue mitigating that pressure. So even though he doesn't have everything locked down with his lower body. He's got the leg in enough danger that the inability to defend properly forced Sanders into a position to tap. So, good for Yahya. I mean, Yahya is, I believe he is second all-time in bantamweight history for the WEC and UFC in terms of bantamweight finishes. And he might be. I
don't think he's even ranked right now, is he?
Probably not.
He's not even ranked.
Ronnie Yahya gets no respect, man. Absolutely none.
He's been, well, I mean,
and look, some of it
he's finally making a little noise, so maybe this will finally get him in there. Get him in there. Put him in there with a top 10 guy or something. Put him in there with Pedro Munoz.
That's a thought.
Or Sterling.
Sterling's got a fight coming up. He's fighting... Who's he fighting?
I think you're right.
They announced it. I can't remember. Some other grappler.
Cody Stamann.
Stamann. That's it. Stamann.
See, Stamann is 3-0, but I feel like why is Stamann number 10?
I think it's based almost entirely on his last win, and I can't remember who it was.
I mean, just because he beat Caraway.
That's it.
Earlier,
because he beat Caraway. No, that's it. That's it.
Just because you beat Caraway, you're ranked number 10. I mean, come on.
Welcome to the rankings.
This is ridiculous.
I would actually have liked Stamann and Yahya. Now that I think about it,
at least put Yahya in the top 15 now. Get Johns and Andrade out of there, and put Yahya in the top 15. He can easily be number 14 right now.
Yeah, they have De Andrade. Oh, geez, take Thomas Almeida out of there.
Yeah, I mean, come on here. I feel like the people doing the rankings just aren't doing their job.
They don't actually watch anything that takes place on Fight Pass. Anyway, that was, again, Fight Night 135. It was a solid event, all things considered. Overperformed relative to my expectations. There were a few duds. And there were a few stretches of time that were just...
I just feel there were a couple fights they could have put on the main card to just,
Look,
Krause Alves could have easily been a main card fight.
If you take Johnson and Feely and Casey and Hill off of that and replace it with, again, say Krause and Alves and Yahya and Sanders.
Yeah.
I mean, you still have a few...
I'm still surprised Gall, after how hard they pushed Gall before they put him on the prelims. I'm very surprised.
Yeah. He's coming off of that loss, and it was, again, like a loss in his first non-gimmicky fight.
All right. Fair enough.
Next, he'll get a main card shot and a pay-per-view against Diego Sanchez for reasons.
So next week we get a short break, and then we'll be back the following week for Woodley versus Till.
That's gonna suck. That fight is.
Is the belt finally coming off Woodley? Are we gonna have a new UFC?
Oh god, I don't know. I've gone back and forth on this.
I'm picking Woodley.
Woodley's certainly the more proven commodity, but
he just makes guys look bad,
Well, there's two things
Constantly.
There's a couple of things that worry me about this fight. First of all, Till's ability to make weight.
That's a big one.
I mean, it's entirely possible that Till wins the fight but misses weight, I would just laugh. That's like what I want out of life now. But Woodley, the big thing with Woodley that worries me in this fight is his propensity for putting himself on the cage, which is where Darren Till wants you. That's where he does his best work, is when he's got your movement limited, your back's on the fence, and he can kind of bounce in and out of range. And
but in two fights, like Stephen Thompson was just out of sorts against Woodley. Like in the second fight, it was like he was just so tentative.
That's because Thompson's more of a counter striker, and Woodley does not expose himself
was not,
enough to be countered.
It was in the second fight. It was like Woodley wouldn't engage at all.
Neither of them engaged in the second fight. It was awful.
I mean, at least in the first fight, I felt like there were a couple moments where like Thompson was actually trying.
And people remember that fight because of the fifth round.
And then I feel like Thompson is delusional because I don't know. I remember him saying he had to fight Woodley that way or some BS. I mean,
I think the way he fought Woodley maximized his chance of success. That doesn't mean it's pretty to watch, and it doesn't mean he was going to win.
It didn't maximize any. All it maximized was an awful fight and him walking away from the fight without the belt again.
I mean, there's only so much different that he could reasonably do. And
he could have done a lot different.
And
I mean, he beat Rory McDonald, and he showed off a lot of different aspects of his game in that
but
fight.
Rory engaged with him. I mean, Tyron Woodley's.
Look,
it comes down to this: Tyron Woodley's style of fighting is predicated on two things. He either tries to explode and cover distance and surprise you, or he lulls you into overcommitting against him when he's got his back on the fence.
I think he's going to do that to Darren Till.
And I think the big danger for him there is that Darren Till is not a reactive counter-striker like Stephen Thompson. Darren Till is perfectly content to punch you in the face a few times while you're trying to get a read on him.
Darren Till did not soundly dominate Stephen Thompson, Robert.
No.
I mean, that was a close fight. And he's big for his weight class, but he's having trouble making weight. He might not even be able to stay at welterweight.
No, probably not. I mean, when they put him and Tyron Woodley next to each other, I knew Till was bigger, but man.
That's kind of why I'm concerned here, because even if Till were to win, if he makes weight and wins the belt, he might not be long for this division.
Probably not.
And that really worries me. And it bothers me because, like, fighters, you talk about fighters being comfortable, but I mean, that video of him, like, he going blind during his weight cut, I mean, how far do we need to take this?
My thing with that is if you are not making weight, then pretty clearly you're not in the weight class you should be in.
Yoel Romero missed weight for back-to-back title fights.
I'm not rehashing the debate on the second one for that with you. The first one...
The first, blah, blah, blah. He missed weight.
Hang on.
Back-to-back UFC title main events, he missed weight.
And look, I said I didn't care as much about the Rockhold one because I didn't care about interim titles, and they on short notice tried to accelerate his weight cut to accommodate that fight. It happens.
Okay.
I was pissed at him for the second one because there were no mitigating circumstances. He should have made weight. I was pissed at the Athletic Commission because it's a fifth of a pound. It's nothing. But
it doesn't matter if it's a fifth.
In all seriousness, no. If we're gonna bring this up, I mean this in all seriousness. How many times do you think fighters missed weight when we used the old scales and had the old official weigh-ins that were on a stage in front of thousands of people and they just weren't going to announce because there was no way in hell.
Well, there's one I definitely know of. But just one.
All right. Which
Mark Hominick. Mark Hominick in Canada.
Okay, and here's my thing. There's no way in hell they were ever going to announce Chuck Liddell as 205.2. Ever.
I remember
under any circumstances.
The Diaz brothers complained about GSP against.
That's with digital scales.
Okay, well,
I don't just mean that. I mean, let's jump back to when like Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell were fighting. The official weigh-ins were utilizing those old weighted bar scales.
Okay.
With no one actually photographing this, with a single commission official looking at it on a stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people.
Okay, well, I'm not a commission official. I mean, if you want to scrutinize...
And I seriously question whether or not we are better off bitching about a fifth of a pound.
Yes, we are.
We are absolutely not.
Because these are the rules. These are the rules. You have to be... In a title fight, you have to be at the mark or under it. That's the rule.
And
you're not allowed to be over the mark.
And I'm fine with that when we get to half a pound. But again, I seriously question every time because I mean, look, how many years did we just go with those wobbly ass scales that I guarantee you, if we were doing it under,
it's not the scale, Robert. It's the fighter. It's the
guy,
fighter.
No, it's the guy reading the scale. In this instance, it's the guy reading the scale. Cause
you would have to prove to me they were. I'd need more proof of what you're saying. The only one I know of for sure was the Mark Hominick fight, where they definitely.
They definitely did
fudged away.
There were some rounding issues with the GSP circumstance, and I still don't think there's actually
the GSP circumstance that was with his shorts on. That was with his shorts and underwear on. Okay, so he was wearing clothes.
I know, and I'm not complaining about that one necessarily, but
the Daniel Cormier incident.
Okay, there was the Cormier incident. That's true.
And that's all, but that was in full view of the commission, and the commission not even saying
again.
anything.
I seriously wonder if we could go back in time and force everyone from all the UFC's formative years, not all the way back to the Dark Ages, but let's do formative. Let's Couture, Ortiz, Frank Shamrock, early Chuck, Matt Hughes. Let's get those guys back when they were fighting, and how many times. If they had to step on a digital scale with a photographer there taking a picture of the result, would their weight have been 171 instead of 170? Would it have been 170.9 instead of 170?
What if?
Well, okay,
you're talking about what ifs.
And
Robert, if I had wheels and pedals, I'd be a bicycle.
And here's the relevant portion of that particular discussion. Is the sport, from a fan enjoyment perspective, better off doing things the way they are done now versus back then?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't have enough information to answer that.
I would submit the general lack of enthusiasm that this contributes to it.
You can argue, did we enjoy the sport more with USADA or without it?
Without.
Okay, so
almost unequivocally.
All right, then let's just abandon random drug testing.
Quite frankly, there's a perfectly valid argument.
Let's go back to TRT and just what we had before.
There's a perfectly valid argument for doing away with drug testing, period.
Well, that's never going to happen.
I'm just saying there's an incredibly valid argument for it.
All right, I want to move on from this. It's not confirmed. But it looks like the Holloway-Ortega set will be rescheduled for UFC 231 in December. We still don't know the full story with what happened with Holloway, but hopefully he's okay and he'll be ready to go here.
They're talking about sending Holloway to Toronto?
Yeah, Holloway and Ortega.
That poor guy.
What's wrong with that?
They just keep sending him to these cold locations.
I don't think Holloway is complaining.
He's not.
Didn't he fight? Didn't he beat Aldo in Brazil?
He did.
That's hardly cold.
No, but that was one of the first times he'd mentioned. He brought it up over at, I can't remember which fight it was.
Fought Stevens in Las Vegas. Lamas was in California. He hasn't been able to get the fight in Hawaii and wasn't there.
Oh no, it was the Pettis fight. Okay, it was the Pettis win when he was in Toronto. And his rematch
Pettis
with Aldo
and Oliveira were both in Canada. Big deal.
His rematch with Aldo was in Detroit.
So what?
I'm just saying, it's
Detroit.
Detroit.
People in cold climates deserve good fights too, Robert. Why are you being racist? Why are you being geographically prejudiced?
Hey, look, my state can't get an actual event.
All right.
Saying,
so
why does Detroit get Max Holloway and Jose Aldo?
It's the luck of the draw. Look, they tried to book this fight a couple times already, so I hope the fight finally happens here.
Ditto. That's the best featherweight fight you can do.
I hope he's recovering and it's not whatever he had was not serious. So
yeah.
It looks like that fight's finally on the horizon, at least again for right now.
Good. It's a great fight.
Do you think Brock Lesnar has been looking smaller since he's gotten back on the USADA program?
I have not seen Brock Lesnar The last time I saw Brock Lesnar was him in a three-piece suit shoving Daniel Cormier across the octagon.
Okay. All right. So Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes looks like that's happening at UFC 232.
It's a good fight.
By Amanda Nunes, we hardly knew ye.
I don't know, man. I mean, I'm not picking Cyborg, but
I'm picking Cyborg.
Let me rephrase. I'm not picking Nunes necessarily, but
right.
She's going to be pretty easily, I think, the best fighter Cyborg's fought.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some ways that matches up very, very hard for Cyborg. So it's a good fight. I wish I was excited for it, but it's a good fight.
Okay. Gilbert Burns versus Olivier Ben Mercier at UFC 231 was moved there.
They remade that, right? That was supposed to happen at one point. Somebody fell out.
Yeah.
It's a solid fight.
Okay. I like both guys for sure. I think those are kind of the big fight announcements.
I think did they finally confirm I know they confirmed this on the broadcast. I don't know if they confirmed it prior to that. That the UFC's Russia debut is going to wind up being a Fight Pass exclusive.
I didn't hear that during the broadcast, but they've been talking about the Russia card for a while, haven't they?
Yeah, they've got the main event.
It'll be Fight. Yeah, it's going to be Fight Pass.
It's all Fight Pass.
So that'll be Hunt versus Olenek. Krylov. Wait,
Krylov's back.
How did that happen?
They signed him back? He left after the Serkinov fight. Had a few fights in. I think it was ACB or M1. I can't remember which.
They shouldn't have let him. Fights. They shouldn't have let him go in the first place.
I would agree with that. Now, I'm more excited for him coming back than anything else on that card.
So he's fighting Jan Blachowicz. I like that fight, actually. I mean, I don't... It's not a great fight.
It should be a good reintroduction for Krylov, and we can all remember that, hey, there's another prospect at light heavyweight besides Dominic Reyes.
And God help us, Andrei Arlovsky is fighting on that card. Andrei Arlovsky. Shamil Abdurakhimov.
Oh, God, that's going to suck.
I don't know. Maybe the Russia fans will like that, though.
No one's going to like that fight. I remember every one of both of them. I remember their last fights. That's not going to be good. Hunt? I mean, if you want a Russian in the main event,
yeah,
sure.
Okay.
I mean, Mark Hunt's probably just going to knock his head off, but...
Are they even going to be able to sell out that show?
Depends.
Is that a pretty big arena? No, this is a stadium, Robert.
No, they're using a different configuration.
Oh, wait.
There's only going to be...
The fight's supposed to be at Olympic Stadium, right?
Yeah,
so
but
what kind of configuration are they using?
It has a maximum of 17,000 seats.
All right, so that's... So do you think they can sell that out even in Russia?
Probably. I mean, look, we've seen the UFC go into fresh markets with worse cards than this and draw good numbers.
It's true. I mean, you have a couple... I mean, it's not a great card, but...
It's really not. Like, I mean, look, the best things on...
Thiago Alves is still fighting, too, but he's on this card.
Coming off of that loss to Millender. I mean, look, the best things on this card... They have not finalized this. I mean, Peter Yan's supposed to be fighting. I like Peter Yan. Mairbek Taissimov's fighting Desmond Green in probably the best fight on this card.
Okay.
Yeah, and Nikita Krylov's back. I mean, that's about it. Like, it's really not a good card, but there's a lot of local flavor.
Something else did happen for 228. I believe Yair Rodriguez is off the card again. Yeah, he's injured. I guess now he's injured.
Oh, can I just say, John Lineker offered to step up and fight Zabit.
Yeah.
And I want that so badly now, but it won't happen.
Good for John. That's not a bad fight, honestly.
I mean, Lineker's a bantamweight, but...
Oh, wait. Because he's... Maybe Lineker just doesn't want to cut weight.
I mean, look, I don't care. Like, that's a good fight. Those two are both crazy.
Yeah. see, and Nico Price versus Abdul Razak Al Hassan.
Yeah.
Nico Price has been looking pretty good lately, actually.
He is, but I don't know, man. Something about his last couple of fights, he's just wound up.
He finished Sullivan and Brown.
Yeah, I mean, and he finished Brown with those hammer fists from the bottom.
And he knocked out Alan Jouban.
Yes, he did.
And finished Brandon Thatch. So
no, he's good, but there's just something about his last couple of fights that have kind of cooled my enthusiasm for him, and I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, it's because he smokes marijuana.
I don't care that he smokes.
Yes, you obviously do. Because there's no other earthly reason why you should be sour on.
Did not
Nico
even
Price.
know he did that.
There's no earthly reason that justifies your souring on Nico Price. Actually, all right.
I'm trying to remember what it was.
Maybe he did something in those fights that cooled you to him, put you off.
His takedown defense, I think, in both of them was really questionable. It might have been that.
Well,
I'd have to rewatch
Conor McGregor has very questionable takedown defense.
I'm not exactly a fan of McGregor's either, for the record.
Okay. Excuse me. All right. Awesome.
My enthusiasm for McGregor is limited to how I control the cult of Conor or when he shuts up and actually gets in the cage. But yeah, so 228's kind of filled out. I don't know, man. That card worries me. I mean, there's some good fights on there. There's a few really good fights there. Oh yeah, speaking of Diego Sanchez, he's on the prelims for that. For that card. Friggin' Sanchez. Oh man. Getting as close to a gimme as he's going to get. I mean, you have John Dodson and Jimmy Rivera's a great fight. Andrade Kovalkiewicz is a really solid fight, all things considered. What else can I be excited about there? Sterling and Stamann isn't the worst thing in the world. Zabit's fighting, and that should be interesting if nothing else. I don't know, man. Those top two fights just worry me, especially Woodley and Till. I mean, Tyron Woodley's on like this string of the worst title defenses in UFC history. I mean, both the Thompson fights were pretty bad. Again, people remember the first one more fondly than they should. The Maia fight was just... I don't have words for that. I think they mentioned that the UFC's trying to have Robbie Lawler main event their first ESPN card.
We haven't seen Robbie Lawler in a while. Has he fought since Dos Anjos?
No, because he had the knee injuries associated with that. I will say though, you could do worse for trying to debuting on ESPN than having a Robbie Lawler fight.
No, I'm curious to see if Lawler is still motivated, if he's still interested in. I feel like my thing about Lawler, Robert, I feel like he still could have some good fights left in him. It's just, I mean, is his heart and is he mentally up for the task? You know.
Yeah, because
now I'm not so. Even when he was champion, I wondered about his motivation.
He's also a guy who I don't think you ever really get a good sense for his motivation until he gets in the cage, because he's always disinterested around events. You know, it's.
Yeah, I agree, but sometimes it just takes a few shots to really warm him up. Now, if he were to fight on the ESPN card, let's see.
I think they were talking about him and Thompson.
That's not bad, actually.
No, I was really looking forward to that fight when we all thought Lawler was going to beat Woodley. I was really looking forward to.
Or I wouldn't mind him fighting Usman for that matter, because I think does Usman have his next fight lined up?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything about him.
Usman's due for good. Usman doesn't. I don't think he's got a fight lined up, Robert.
He might not at the moment.
No, after the Maya. So I think that's a good matchup, honestly, and that's a good test for Usman, don't you think?
It is, but I don't know. That's also one of those things that...
It's not... All right, well, in terms of a fan-friendly matchup, Thompson is the better fight. Yes.
And
yeah,
that has to be... That certainly has to be a consideration. And
ESPN, yes. But, look, Usman is he's a rising contender, and you have to take that into account at some point, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Hang on, let me bring up the rankings.
Usman's number 6, Lawler's number 5. You know, you can argue that probably. Thompson is ranked number 4. Desanya's number 3. Maybe Desanya's
because they signed Magny and Ponzinibbio.
Yeah. So maybe Thompson can fight Lawler. Dos Anjos can fight Usman. What do you think of that?
I think it plays essentially the way RDA and Covington did, but I don't hate the fight.
I mean, I think the point is you have to book these guys. So, Usman's gonna need a big fight. You got to put him in a big fight sooner or later. You got to give him guy.
He just beat Maya. Isn't he undefeated?
I think he's undefeated in the UFC.
If he has lost, it's out. It was outside the UFC.
He's 13-1. Yeah, he's 13-1. So he had one loss. I forget to who.
Well, it was his second fight. It doesn't really count.
Right. It was earlier in his career. He's unbeaten in the UFC.
Yeah.
You got to give that guy a big fight at some point. And I think Dos Anjos is kind of right up his alley, right? Both guys' alley right now because Dos Anjos had the loss to Covington.
Or he can keep angling for the Covington fight.
What? I mean, wait, Covington Covington isn't even in the... Oh, never mind. He is.
I believe he is still technically the interim champion.
He's still technically the interim champion until the fight. All these stupid rules. Never mind.
He's basically going to hold that pointless belt until Woodley actually fight.
All right.
But Usman and Covington, that is so much. That's asking for like 3 things. If you book that fight, there's 3 things that are going to happen that are probably going to be just ugly for all parties. One is the fight, because I think it would be just an ugly, ugly fight. 2 is the hot takes about the theoretical like representation that is Colby Covington in his persona fighting Kamaru Usman in his persona. And all the crap that would be stirred up by that.
That'd be good. I look forward to that.
I do not. I am so profoundly sick.
You should be
of those takes.
You should be
so profoundly sick of them.
You should be very excited by this, Robert.
No.
Yes.
Nothing about that fight excites me apart from a theoretical return to meritocratic normalcy, which I think we all desperately need.
Well, that's never going to happen in combat sports.
Oh, I'm aware it's never happening. But we could at least move in that direction. But I mean, the number of people who would write about the metaphor.
If people would start writing about guys like Figueiredo and guys who are doing the merit instead of the squeaky wheels. And and desperately calling for Brock Lesnar's return, then I think we would move in that direction.
That would be nice.
I remember this article calling like Sarah Kaufman a sportsman or a pure sportsman or something when she was fighting Ronda. I don't know. I just found it obnoxious, but whatever. Because the sport enjoys spectacle more than it does merit. That's my point.
Well, the fan base does.
The people, it's the writers too. It's the writers too. They want the spectacle as well.
And I would argue that if them writing about the spectacle stopped getting them the clicks and the follows and the comments that it does, they would start writing about the merit as well, but... which part of this, which part of this is chicken or egg, and where do you stake your belief as far as the unseen hand theories?
Honestly, I don't hate. Honestly, all that aside, I don't hate an Usman Covington fight. It's not a great fight, but I mean,
I would hate the build-up. I would hate the actual fight, but it's the type of fight that needs to happen.
Look. The thing about Usman is he's not the most exciting fighter, right? But he's successful, and you got to put him in big fights at some point.
Yep.
All right, that's all I really have to say on that matter.
Yeah, again, I think it's the fight that should happen. The trash talk from both sides would be just cringeworthy and beyond stupid. And people would write about this.
It works.
On a significant portion of the fan base, it absolutely does. And a bunch of writers would write about the symbolic significance of the African immigrant taking on the Trump-supporting Covington, and I will vomit from my eyes. And then the fight itself will happen, and it will kind of suck, and no one will care, and one of them will win. And go on to fight for the title, in a fight that, if Woodley is still champion, will probably also suck out loud. But such are the days of our lives as in the welterweight division at the moment.
James Gunn isn't going to be brought back to direct Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Or so they say.
I'm aware. I'm of the opinion that's a mistake from a creative standpoint and from what I think it leads to as far as mobocracies go, but
I think my general problem right now with everybody in general is everyone is trying to be like this moral police officer to society when every moral, like with everyone trying to be the moral police officer, everyone has done something morally abhorrent at one point in their lives or another, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And so everyone's a hypocrite, and everyone and no one, it's like, if you want someone to be held accountable to a certain set of rules, then everyone has to be held accountable, including yourself. And to me, that's the sin James Gunn committed. And because you know what? I can understand having a shocking sense of humor, right? And telling those kind of jokes. Because let's be honest, lots of popular shows use really shocking humor like that. Was Twitter the best place to put that out there? No, it was not.
And it also does need to be brought up that those are 10-year-old tweets?
Not all of them. This is my problem. People are saying like these are 10 years old. Well, no, not all of them were 10 years old. Some of them were as recent as less than 6 years ago. So
that's still a non-trivial amount of time. Okay. Donald Trump's comments that made him morally disqualified to half the country were even longer than that, were they not? Some of them, yeah. And in fairness,
all right. So I mean, what difference does how recent does it have to be really abhorrent? Do you think? Does it have to be Roseanne recent, like at that moment, or is 10 years like the statute of limitations is expired?
I don't know. I also think a lot of it comes down to.
See, this is the problem.
A lot of it also is what's happened in the interim.
Everyone's trying to be the moral police officer, and if you look through everyone's backgrounds, they've probably done something really that can be construed as like dumb and offensive at some point.
We've all done or said dumb or offensive things. Every single one of us.
I agree. I don't think Gunn should have been fired for it, but Gunn was basically supporting this kind of. He was basically supporting the action that was taken against him, and that was the mistake he made.
Yeah, look, just as long as Taika Waititi is kept as far away from that movie as humanly possible.
Hater.
Don't even start with it. Thor Ragnarok was a steaming pile of garbage.
Oh, go whatever. If that was a steaming pile to you, then you shouldn't have liked Infinity War.
How do you figure? Hold on. Those two things are not at all equivalent. I had
What is it you disliked about Thor Ragnarok?
The constant stepping. Okay, a couple of things. The constant stepping on of emotional moments with stupid humor.
Which, I mean,
I was genuinely concerned about that with Infinity War. Thankfully, they didn't.
Okay.
The existence of Korg, because that character never shuts up and serves no purpose. I took serious issues with the pacing on Junk World, because boy does that take forever.
Sakaar.
Okay. The entire Executioner subplot could have been cut from that.
Okay.
All right. There's a full review. You can listen to Mark and I dissect that. And my point being,
I don't think James Gunn should have been fired, and now I'm very disappointed that it looks like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 could be in trouble now. But, you know, I'm not saying like entertainment people need to, you know, shut up on social media, but I think everyone should shut up on social media, quite frankly.
All right. On that note, if there's no other major news we wanted to tackle, what do you got to plug?
Reviewing Deadpool 2 on Blu-ray. Some other stuff I can't talk about yet because of non-disclosures, but very exciting. But thank you, Robert, and looking forward to checking out Till versus Woodley and Woodley remaining champion for your hell.
Look, at this point, Tyron Woodley's continued reign of just I am compelled by Woodley's title reign, just like I'm compelled to watch car wrecks. Like, just how bad can this get?
Yeah. I think we're in for a...
I mean, let's be fair. We all thought that second Wonder Boy fight was it. Like, no, it can't get worse than this. Then there was the Maya fight. It can't get worse than this. It can, and I'm curious to see how he's going to do it.
Thank you, Robert. Have a good night.
I'll see you next week. All right. Next week, again, Jeff and I will be previewing UFC 228. So... hopefully Zabit Magomedsharipov will have an opponent announced by then. If not, I will go over the valuable experience he will be gaining by fighting TBD. As I don't have a whole lot going on this week, actually. Last week, Mark and I had our big summer wrap-up show. So if you're following the Ride Legend Broadcasting Network, you can listen to that. It's just Mark and I talking about the movies of the summer, some movies we saw that we didn't officially review. And then we're off until I think The Predator is the next movie we'll be reviewing together. So you can tune in for that when it happens in a couple of months. Again, I'm enjoying the week off of podcasting, basically. So we'll be back next week for the 228 preview. Until then, thank you all for your continued support. I don't deserve it, but hopefully one day I will. For Jeff, I am Robert again. Thanks to everyone who followed along with... Oh, I forgot. Thank you to everyone who follows along with my live coverage of events. I don't know why you do, but I thank you for it. It means a lot that, you know, there's all those... that there's, you know, a lot of places you could go for the same content that I provide. And you choose mine, so thank you for that very much. It is deeply appreciated on my part. I make jokes about it a lot, but I do appreciate it. It means a lot, so thank you. Until next week, for Jeff, I'm Robert. Please stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.